Hi, I'm Sherry from Whole Circle Studio, and welcome to the Shoreline Shells Block of the Month and Quilt Sew Along. Today I'm going to give you some tips as you begin to piece your 6th Shoreline Shells block, an abstract Nautilus shell. In addition to this video, be sure to refer to the tips included in the pattern, as well as the links below to additional video tutorials. Let's get started. I get asked a lot where I start and stop sewing when sections touch the edge of the paper piece. As with most everything in quilting, there really is no right or wrong. When I'm not sure of something, I typically test a couple of different ways and then go with what I enjoy doing and what makes my quilt the most secure. So let's take a look at some different sections in the paper pieces, and I could show you where I start and stop sewing. So here we have paper piece J for the circle version, and the equivalent of this would be paper piece U for the grid version. So if a section extends off the paper piece, like it does here between section 1 and 2, I like to sew all the way to the edge of the paper. So I would start right here. If I'm sewing 1 to 2, I would start right here, go down the line, and then continue sewing to the edge of the paper. I typically do a couple of back stitches or stitches in place at the beginning and at the end. I find that then my stitches are just a little bit more secure, especially when I go later and tug the paper off. So I would continue along the same thing on this one. When I'm sewing on section 3, I would start here at the intersection, go all the way down the line, and I would continue to go to the edge of the paper and do a couple of stitches in place or back stitches here. So just continue and then go all the way along. 4 would be from here to here. 5 from here, I'd follow down and then sew off the edge and then continue. 6, 7, and complete it with 8. I would actually start at the edge of the paper, go down the line, and finish at the edge of the paper. There are some situations where I actually don't like to sew to the edge of the paper. So let me show you what I do. Here I have paper piece E for the circle version, or paper piece P for the grid version would be the equivalent. So when sections are on the edge of the paper, I'll often look ahead to see future sections I'll be sewing and to see if I may intersect them. It's not totally necessary to do this, but I do. There's reasons why, and I'll explain in a moment. And it does make it easier to visualize if you have a pencil close by. So here in paper piece E, we have section 1, which we'll cover, and then we'll sew along the line between section 1 and 2. So I would start here at the intersection, and this is a case where I would stop right on that line. The reason being is I could see later on for section E, I'm going to be sewing, and that's where I can go right to the edge. For here, there might be, if I kept going straight, and then later if I sewed to the edge, there would be sort of a little triangle in there, which some paper would get trapped. It's not the end of the world. I've certainly had paper trapped in there in my quilts, but it just makes things a little bit easier if I, again, stop here for 2, because later on I could see for E, I'll be going to the edge of the paper, to the edge of the paper. Same thing over here when I'm sewing on section 4 along this line. Here I would start again along on the edge of the paper because there's nothing that's going to intersect it later. But when I got to here, I would probably stop right at the seam allowance and not continue to the edge of the paper, again, because I could see section 5 would intersect it. This is getting really, really nitty-gritty, and if you try it and it's confusing to think ahead, just stick to sewing to the edge of the paper. And just to make sure you kind of understand my logic, I'll show you one more example. So here we have paper piece F for the circle layout. The equivalent of this would be Q for the grid layout. So here, if I am sewing on section 8, say, I could see nothing's going to intersect later a line in the seam allowance. So I would start here and sew along, but I can see ahead, looking ahead, when I sew on section 11, And either a pencil helps with this, or a ruler, or even the edge of our old room card. Sometimes just kind of sketching it out helps. Later on, I'll be showing on section 11. I could see if I sewed for section 8 to the edge, again, I might get a little weird trapping. It's not the end of the world, but why have that extra bulk? I'll later have this line that will secure my sewing. So for section 8, I would start or stop here and go all the way to the edge of the paper this way. And then, like I said, later on for section 11, I'll be sewing along this line, and I can go right to the edge of the paper to secure everything. Here are a couple of other reminders for block 6. Be sure to continue to look for dots when you're sewing your paper pieces together. There are a few critical alignments for this block, but not too many. Also, make sure you're using a hot iron and a wool pressing mat if you have it, and a clapper as I demonstrated in block 5 when pressing your seams. There are a couple of bulky areas, and pressing well between sewing paper pieces together helps a lot. Also, remember when your block will be a lot less bulky later when we remove all the paper, and we can give the block another good press at that time. I'll include a link to block 5 video where I reviewed my tips for bulky seams there. I can't wait to see your blocks come together. Thank you again for being here and for sewing along with us. I'll be back next month with more tips. If you have any questions or comments or something you'd like me to show in a future video, please let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to share your progress on Instagram using the Shoreline Shells hashtags found on the pattern so we can check out what you're working on. Or I'd love for you to email me photos of your block. My email address can be found in the pattern. See you next month, and happy sewing.